Moving right along today, let us talk about the first of the two major themes of this World Issues course, globalization and sustainability. There are two major themes. This is it. So number one, we're going to talk about globalization. So what exactly is globalization? Globalization gets thrown around a lot. Is a terminology you've probably heard many times, but what it technically is a interconnectedness of the world through various countries, economic, technological, political, cultural, sociological, ecological, and geographic. All those things are called globalization. Global village itself is where everyone is linked together. Global village, pretty straightforward. Trade between countries, that sort of stuff. Some globalization is negative. There are positives, but there's also negatives because, as we've seen, a factory could shut down in one country because it is more expensive and move to another country where it is much cheaper to do, but can be unsafe. So globalization has pros and cons to it, but that is the technical term for this. So globalization, interconnectivity between both, all countries basically is what it comes down to. So there are criticisms to globalization. There has been a lot of thoughts of destruction of local cultures and a weakening of traditional beliefs because a lot of it is American dominated and has been American dominated for many years, although we are starting to see a cultural shift, but we'll talk about that later. But a lot of it's kind of North American implied overtop westernization of this. So it is an ongoing process right now. We don't know. Well, actually, that's not true. We do now know the impacts of globalization. If we look at globalization right now, it's the reason why we're having such an issue with the COVID right now. The pandemic is part of the reason is the globalization. So this is something that is both positive and negative, as we're seeing more of the negative impacts. There are 8 types of globalization that can occur separately or in various combinations all over the world. So I'm just going to run through them for you, the 8 major types of globalization. So obviously the first one is financial. The world's financial system is basically intimately interconnected. The stock markets affect each other. They're interconnectedness of the nation, but it does reflect what happens network and world cities and have significant financial markets. So there has been a lot of this, and we do see China especially purchasing a lot of American debt, and America kind of tanking right now. So there is a lot of interconnectedness when it comes to finances and financial globalization. So that's a big one. That's financial, always a big one. Economic. Economic globalization is almost like financial, except in terms of goods and the movement of goods between this. And it's been one of the most controversial, though, because people want a good price for stuff, so they'll buy overseas, and then you won't buy and support local, which can be more expensive. So it's all these types of things. Economic globalization tends to only increase the differences between the world's haves and the have-nots. So that's a big one, and that's an issue that can be seen again and again over time. And it can be a power move depending on the country. The more powerful and influential your economy is, the more you have. So it's interesting in terms of economic globalization. But it does create a bigger divide between the have and the have-nots. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Technological globalization. Global village equals technology globalization. Technology has allowed globalization. That's one of the big reasons why we have globalization. The globalization is a process. As we said, it's not necessarily a destination. We're not there yet. It's ongoing, and like I discussed earlier, it's something that's ever changing. Most of the globalization happens in countries that have the money to pay for cell phones and planes and all those sorts of stuff. So technology really goes hand in hand with globalization. A lot of countries are not or unable to support a lot of the um, types of cell phone networks and towers and that sort of thing. So more of the traditional phone networks. So that's kind of where we are with in terms of technological globalization. So it again goes hand in hand with if you have it, and it kind of defeats the haves and the have-nots at the time. So that's in terms of technological globalization. Political, obviously, political globalization. The countries are becoming more economically and technologically independent, so there is a bigger push for a more uniform type of political system in order to move forward. For example, the World Trade Organization, the NAFTA, NATO, the International Monetary Fund, and a lot of the countries are more neoliberal economic perspective. So you're moving into a democracy of sorts, or ideally you're moving into a democracy of sorts where you can see more political globalization for it seems to work. Although there are various forms and there's some that aren't. I mean, that's not it's the generalization, it's not the mandatory way of doing things, but generally that's kind of how it goes in order to be able to move forward economically and financially. Cultural globalization. There's been a gradual harmonization of the world's cultures as we expand into places where there are vastly different cultures, although now we are starting to see that there is more of an acceptance and a wanting to keep more traditional cultures together, which is fantastic to see. And this idea that preserving cultures, although we are kind of harmonizing between countries, but we're also managing to keep keep that independent and that unique culture for each countries. And a lot of critics of globalization have commented that they feel that globalization can contribute to the loss of the diversity of cultures, but we are seeing a need to preserve and a need to push forward in terms of keeping. So although we do have that globalization and that kind of united, you can have both. You can have both that kind of independent culturalization as well as that globalization of culturalization. So that's how roughly we're going to break that down. Ecological globalization. There is a growing trend, obviously this kind of goes hand in hand with climate change, that the planet has to be treated as a single organized ecosystem rather than a collection of separate ecosystems. We need to work as a unit in order to preserve. It's not necessarily just one country, everyone. There needs to be a united effort in order to work towards this ecological globalization, and that's something that is important and should be important going forward. Sociological globalization is that we are all members of one world. Even though we're different and we have different backgrounds, we're from different countries, and we look different, we are actually all the same. We are all people, we are all living within this world, and we have common attitudes, and we need to accept common attitudes and standards that should exist within every country. And we are seeing this if we're drawing this back to the Black Lives Matter movement. This is something that a lot of countries have shown solidarity in terms of dismantling the white supremacy, of the white patriarchy in society. So we need to be accepting of that and realize that this isn't just a singular thing. This wasn't something that, even though it started in America, it has exposed worldwide globalization, if you will, the problem. So that's part of that sociological, geographical globalization, of course. We, in the past, looked at what happened within one country or what relationships existed among the countries, but now we're seeing the world as borderless because of technology, because of economy, because of ecology, all these things. This is not just a singular country. We are a cohesive unit as one, and we need to understand those relationships in order to preserve them. Okay, so that is it for globalization. I hope that wasn't too heavy. It's a bit of a heavy topic to get your mind around, but there are those types of globalizations, and whether or not globalization is a positive or a negative, again, is a perspective for you, but it is a reality. It is something that is going on and is continuing to go on. Do we know the ultimate end to it? We don't. So for now, I'll give you the information as usual, and you decide the perspective. And that's it for this lecture, and we will see you in the next.